All right, today we're jumping into what is seriously one of the most important books of the 20th century. It's Karl Polanyi's 1944 masterpiece, The Great Transformation. And it is a fascinating dive into the economic and political roots of the world we live in today. And I want to be clear, this isn't some dusty old history lesson. What this book does is tackle a massive historical puzzle. And the answer it comes up with has huge implications for all the big debates we're having right now about globalization, the role of markets, and the future of our society. So to really get what Polanyi is arguing, you first have to understand the incredible mystery he was trying to solve. And it all starts with this really strange, really unique period in modern history. Think about this. For a solid 100 years, from 1815 right up to 1914, the great powers of Europe were basically at peace with each other. Now, it wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, for sure. But compared to the centuries of constant, brutal warfare that came before it, this was something else entirely. It was, frankly, a kind of miracle. And then it felt like it happened overnight. That whole peaceful system just shattered. The world plunged into the horror of World War I, then the economic chaos of the Great Depression, and then the rise of fascism. It was a complete and total collapse of a civilization. So this is the million-dollar question, right? How does that happen? How does a civilization that seemed so stable, so prosperous, just completely fall apart into catastrophe? This is the puzzle Polanyi set out to solve, and he was convinced he'd found the answer. His core argument is absolutely fascinating. He says this collapse wasn't an accident, it wasn't just bad luck, it was the direct result of a radical and he would say utopian experiment, the attempt to build a society around the idea of a self-regulating market. Now this is a fundamental flip. You have to understand, for pretty much all of human history, the economy was just a part of society. It was embedded in social customs, relationships, and traditions. It was there to serve the needs of people. But this new radical idea that popped up in the 19th century turned that completely on its head. It said, no, society must be rearranged to serve the needs of the market. And Polanyi doesn't mince words here. He didn't see this as some natural evolution. He flat out called it a stark utopia. In other words, a dangerous fantasy, an impossible dream that could never actually work without completely destroying the fabric of human society. So what did this utopia actually look like in theory? Well, it's the idea that market prices should run everything, and I mean everything, with absolutely no interference from the government, from traditions, or from any kind of social duty. And for that to even be possible, everything had to be turned into a commodity that could be bought and sold. And this is the absolute heart of his argument. Polanyi points to three crucial things that were forced to become commodities but were never meant to be. He calls them fictitious commodities. First, labor, which is really just another name for people and their lives. Second, land, which is, nature itself. And third, money, which isn't a product made for sale. It's a social tool we created to make exchange easier. And this really gets to his core warning. If you take human beings and the natural world and you subject them to the cold, hard logic of the market, you will eventually, in his words, annihilate the human and natural core of society itself. But here's the thing. Society doesn't just sit back and let itself be destroyed. It reacts, it pushes back, it defends itself. And this defensive reaction is what sets up the central conflict of the modern age. Polanyi has a brilliant term for this dynamic, the double movement. It's like a great historical tug of war. On one side, you have the movement to expand the market, to make it touch every part of life. And on the other side, you get this spontaneous counter-movement from society to protect itself from the dangers of that market. So you get this constant push and pull. The market expands, and it causes huge disruptions, like mass unemployment or instability. So what happens? People react. They demand protection. They form labor unions. They push for workplace safety laws. They call for tariffs. But every single one of those protective measures gets in the way of this self-regulating market, which just creates even more tension. This is probably Polanyi's most famous and most brilliant insight. He argued that creating a so-called free market actually took a massive, centrally planned effort from the government. It had to be forced into existence. But the pushback, the demand for social protections, that wasn't some grand plan. It was just a natural, spontaneous reaction from all kinds of people trying to save their communities and their lives. So you've got this incredible tension building and building for decades. How did it all finally come crashing down? Well, Polanyi argues it's this grinding conflict of the double movement that ultimately broke the whole international system and put an end to that 100 years of peace. Now, the key piece of machinery holding this whole global market utopia together was the international gold standard. The idea was to create one giant global economy by linking every country's currency to a fixed amount of gold. In theory, it would all run automatically. But there was a brutal catch, an absolutely brutal one. If you wanted to stay on the gold standard, you had to be willing to sacrifice your own people for your currency. If your economy was in trouble, your government might have to force wages down and create massive unemployment, all just to protect the exchange rate. Faced with that impossible choice, your people or your currency, nations instinctively fought back. This is the double movement playing out on a global stage. They put up protective tariffs. They scrambled to build colonial empires so they could have their own protected markets. They developed central banks to try and insulate their economies from the harsh logic of the global market. And the end result of all this? In trying to protect themselves, they ended up breaking the system they were trying to escape from. Its collapse, Polanyi argues, leads us straight into the economic nightmare of the Great Depression. And that chaos, in turn, created the perfect conditions for fascism to rise up as a twisted, brutal new form of protection. So, why does any of this matter to us sitting here today? Well, because Polanyi's analysis suggests that the fundamental tensions that ripped his world apart are very much alive and well in ours. I mean, just look at the parallels. The ideology of market liberalism he described has been reborn as neoliberalism. The rigid discipline of the gold standard, well, you can see echoes of that in what some people call the golden straitjacket of global finance, or in the policies of the Washington Consensus. The names have changed, but that core utopian idea is still there. And yet, you could argue that recent history has proven Polanyi right all over again. As the economist Joseph Stiglitz once wrote, after all the financial crises and failures of economic shock therapy, the idea that markets can just perfectly regulate themselves is pretty much a myth at this point. Which leaves us with a final and pretty crucial question. Polanyi showed how a utopian belief in the power of the self-regulating market led a peaceful world straight into catastrophe. So as we continue to push for an ever more integrated global market today, are we actually listening to his warning? Or are we maybe walking down the same dangerous path?